What are you doing here? Why are you standing here?
I'm waiting for my Uber ride.
Well, we got a report about someone like you loitering in the neighborhood.
Officer, I live here.
Well, you have to move along, else this will turn to an arrest.
I'm not going anywhere. My ride's right around the corner.
On the evening of November 14th, 2024, at approximately 6:47 p.m., a police body camera began recording on a quiet residential street in a suburban neighborhood just outside the city. The footage would document an encounter that lasted less than 12 minutes, but would take nearly a year to resolve. The street was called Elm Ridge Drive. Single-family homes lined both sides. Most of the trees were bare. The temperature had dropped into the low 40s. Streetlights were beginning to flicker on as the sun disappeared behind the rooflines. It was the kind of evening where most people were inside finishing dinner or settling in for the night. A young black man stood near the curb beneath one of those streetlights. His name was Terrence Hammond. He was 27 years old. He wore a brown hoodie, dark jeans, and white sneakers. In his right hand, he held his phone. His thumb moved across the screen. He was checking his Uber app. The car was 3 minutes away. A patrol car rolled slowly down the street and came to a stop about 20 feet from where he stood. The engine idled. The driver's side door opened. A white officer in his late 30s stepped out. His badge read Collins. He left the door open and walked toward Terrence. The officer greeted him with a simple "good evening." Terrence looked up from his phone and responded the same way. His tone was neutral, friendly even. He had no reason to think anything was wrong. The officer explained that dispatch had received a call about someone hanging around the area. He asked if Terrence lived nearby. Terrence said yes. He pointed behind him toward a gray house with black shutters and said that was his home. He added that he was just waiting for his Uber and that it would be there in a couple of minutes. He even lifted his phone slightly to show the screen. The officer asked where he was headed. Terrence said downtown to meet some friends. The officer asked which house was his again. Terrence repeated the address, 1847, the one right behind him. The officer asked if he had identification. Terrence said he did, and that he could show it if needed. Then he asked if there was a problem. The officer didn't answer that question directly. Instead, he said that people don't usually call the police for no reason. Terrence paused. He said he'd only been standing there for maybe 10 minutes and that his ride was almost there. He checked his phone again. 2 minutes now. There was a brief silence. The wind picked up slightly. A car passed on the far end of the block. The officer shifted his weight and said he needed Terrence to move along. Terrence looked confused. He asked what the officer meant by move along. The officer repeated it. He said he needed him to clear the area. Terrence said he was waiting for his ride and that he lived right there. He gestured again toward the house.
Terrence's tone remained calm, but now there was a slight edge of frustration. He said this was his street. The officer said it didn't matter. He wasn't asking, he was telling him to move along. Terrence asked why. He said he wasn't doing anything wrong. He was standing there waiting for a car. He wasn't trespassing. He wasn't bothering anyone. The officer said it wasn't about what Terrence thought he was doing. Someone had called it in. Terrence said that didn't mean he had to leave. He offered to show his identification. He said his mother's name was on the deed and that he could pull up documentation on his phone right now. He started swiping on the screen. The officer told him to put the phone down. Terrence said he was just trying to show him proof. The officer repeated the command more firmly. Terrence lowered his hand slowly. He took a breath. His jaw tightened, but his voice stayed level. He said he understood the officer had received a call, but that he was explaining the situation. He lived there. He wasn't suspicious. He wasn't loitering. His ride was pulling up in less than a minute. He checked the screen again, 45 seconds. The officer said that wasn't his concern. Terrence asked why it wasn't his concern. He asked what law he was breaking. The officer said he was creating a disturbance. Terrence said he was standing still. The officer said he was arguing. The officer's hand moved toward his belt, not to his weapon, to his radio. He said this was the last time he was going to say it. Either Terrence moved along or he was going to be placed under arrest for obstruction. Terrence blinked. He asked, obstruction of what? He said he wasn't obstructing anything. The officer had walked up to him. The officer said he didn't need to explain himself. Terrence said, actually, yes, he did. That was how the law worked. Another silence. A dog barked in the distance. A porch light came on across the street, but no one stepped outside. The officer moved closer. The camera was now only a few feet from Terrence's face. His eyes stayed level. His breathing was controlled, but his shoulders had tensed. The officer asked if Terrence thought he was smart. Terrence said he thought he was right. The officer said people like him always think that. Terrence repeated the words slowly. People like him. The officer said, yeah, people who don't know when to just listen. Terrence said quietly that maybe some people know when something is wrong. Terrence didn't ask what he meant. He already knew. His phone buzzed. He glanced down. He said his Uber was there. Headlights appeared at the end of the block. A silver sedan rolled slowly toward them. Terrence asked if he could go now. The officer told him to turn around. Terrence asked what? The officer said turn around and put his hands behind his back. Terrence said, are you serious? The officer said, now. Terrence said, for what? He hadn't done anything. The officer said he was under arrest for obstruction and failure to comply. If stories like this matter to you, consider subscribing. Now let's continue. Terrence's voice rose slightly. He said this was insane. He said he lived there. He told the officer to check his ID, to call the number on file. He said his name clearly, Terrence Hammond. The officer grabbed his arm. Terrence pulled back instinctively, but didn't resist beyond that. He said, don't touch me. The officer said, stop resisting. Terrence said he wasn't resisting. He was telling him he lived there. The sound of metal. Handcuffs. Terrence's hands were pulled behind his back. His voice cracked slightly now, frustration breaking through. He said this was illegal. The officer began reading him his rights. Terrence said he knew his rights. That was the whole point. The officer continued. Terrence interrupted again. He said the officer hadn't even checked his ID, hadn't verified anything.
The silver sedan pulled up. The window came down. A man's voice asked if he was Terrence. Terrence said yes, and that he was being arrested. The driver sounded confused. He asked what was happening. Terrence said he needed him to call his mother. Her number was in his phone. He needed him to tell her what was happening. Tell her it was Elmridge and Officer Collins, badge number 4729. The officer told the driver to move along. The driver hesitated. He said Terrence was his passenger. The officer repeated himself. The sedan slowly pulled away. Terrence shook his head and said the word unbelievable under his breath. The officer guided him toward the patrol car. Terrence said he wanted the badge number on record. He wanted the supervisor's name, and he wanted the footage preserved. The officer said it was all being recorded. Terrence said good. The back door of the patrol car opened. Terrence was placed inside. The door slammed shut. The officer walked around to the driver's side. The radio crackled. Dispatch asked for a status update. The officer said one in custody and that he was heading to booking. Dispatch asked if there were any injuries. The officer said negative. The engine started. In the rearview mirror, the camera caught a brief image of Terrence sitting upright in the back seat. His eyes were forward. His jaw was set. The reflection showed something else, too. His eyes were red. The drive to the station took 11 minutes. No one spoke. At booking, Terrence was led to a desk. An older officer with gray hair sat behind it reviewing paperwork. He asked for a name. Terrence said, Terrence Hammond. He asked for a date of birth, March 18th, 1997. He asked for an address, 1847 Elm Ridge Drive. The booking officer stopped typing. He looked at Collins. He said that was the address from the call. Collins said, so what? The booking officer said, so he lives there. Collins said he was loitering. The booking officer repeated it slowly, on his own street. Collins said he refused to move. The booking officer looked at Terrence, then back at Collins. He clicked his tongue against his teeth and said this was going to be a problem. Collins asked why. The booking officer just told him to process him. Terrence asked to make a phone call. The booking officer said he would get one. Terrence said he wanted it now. The officer paused, then picked up a desk phone and handed it across the counter. Terrence held it awkwardly with his hands still cuffed. He used his knuckles to dial. The phone rang twice. A woman's voice answered. Terrence said, "Mom, I got arrested." The voice asked what happened. He explained quickly. He was waiting for his Uber outside the house. A cop told him to leave. He said no, he got arrested. The voice asked where he was. He said county booking at Elm Ridge Station. The voice said don't say another word and that she was on her way. The line went dead. Terrence handed the phone back. Collins asked who his mother was. The booking officer asked if he really didn't know. Collins said, should he? The booking officer said he was about to find out. 45 minutes later, the front doors of the station opened. A woman walked in. She wore a tailored coat. Heels clicked sharply on the tile. Her face was composed, but her eyes were hard. She was in her late 50s, black, hair pulled back. She didn't stop at the front desk. She asked where her son was. The desk sergeant started to say something, but she cut him off. She said her name was Diana Hammond, former state attorney general. She said her son had been unlawfully arrested and she wanted to see him immediately. The sergeant reached for a phone. She said she didn't need him to get anyone. She needed her son. A door opened. A man in a white shirt with captain's bars approached. He said her name and apologized for the confusion. She said there was no confusion. She said one of his officers had arrested her son for standing in front of his own home. The captain said they were reviewing the situation. She said she wanted the Bodycam footage, the dispatch call, Officer Collins' report, and she wanted her son released immediately. The captain said Terrence was being processed out now. She said that wasn't good enough. She wanted the charges dropped. He said that was up to the district attorney. She said she knew Jeff personally and that he would drop them, but that wasn't the point. The point was this should never have happened. The captain nodded slowly. He said they would conduct a full review. She said they would, and that she would be filing a civil suit. Another door opened. Terrence walked out, no longer cuffed. When he saw his mother, his shoulders dropped. Relief mixed with exhaustion. She asked if he was hurt. He said no, just humiliated. She said they were leaving. She turned and he followed. As they passed through the front doors, she spoke quietly. She said they were going to make this right. Terrence said he just wanted to go home. She said they would, but first, they were going to make sure this never happened to anyone else. 3 weeks later, a conference room was arranged. Long table, lawyers on both sides, a mediator at the head. Diana Hammond sat next to Terrence with a legal pad covered in notes. Across from them sat 2 city attorneys and a representative from the police union. Officer Collins was not present. One of the city attorneys said they were prepared to offer a settlement of $150,000 and a formal apology. Diana said that was insulting. The second attorney said they understood her frustration. She cut him off. She said no, they didn't. Her son had been racially profiled, falsely arrested, detained without cause. This wasn't a mistake. It was a pattern, and the Bodycam footage proved it. She slid a tablet across the table. On the screen was a frozen image from the footage, the officer's face. She said, "People like you." That's what he said, on camera, in 2024. The first attorney said they acknowledged the language was inappropriate. Diana said inappropriate wasn't the right word. It was discriminatory. It violated his Fourth Amendment rights, and it exposed the department to liability for failing to train officers on constitutional standards. Terrence spoke up. He said he wasn't doing anything wrong. He was standing on his street, waiting for a ride, and he was treated like a criminal because of how he looked. No one responded right away. The city attorneys leaned together and conferred quietly. The mediator suggested a 15-minute recess. In the hallway, Diana put a hand on Terrence's shoulder. She told him he was doing great. He said he kept thinking about what would have happened if he didn't have her, if he didn't know the law,
if he'd reacted differently. She said then they wouldn't be here. He said, exactly. 8 months later, a small press conference was held. Diana Hammond stood at a podium. Terrence stood beside her. Cameras flashed. She said the city had agreed to settle the civil rights lawsuit for $950,000. More importantly, they had committed to implementing mandatory de-escalation training, revising their policies on investigatory stops, and creating an independent review board for use of force incidents. Reporters shouted questions. She raised a hand. She said Officer Collins had been placed on administrative leave pending an internal review. She said the evidence spoke for itself, but the case was never just about one officer. It was about a system that allowed these encounters to happen in the first place. A reporter asked Terrence what he wanted people to take away from this. He leaned toward the microphone. He took a breath. He said he wanted people to know that this happens every day, to people who don't have lawyers for parents, to people who don't have Bodycam footage, to people who don't make it home. His voice wavered slightly. He said he was lucky. He knew his rights. He stayed calm, and he still got arrested. That was the reality. And until it was fixed, none of them were safe. Another reporter asked if he had anything to say to Officer Collins. Terrence said he hoped he learned from this. He really did, because the next person might not walk away. Officer Collins was suspended for 90 days without pay. He was required to complete additional training before returning to duty. He remains employed by the department. Terrence Hammond continues to advocate for police reform. He has spoken at community forums and legislative hearings. The Bodycam footage was viewed over 12 million times online. Public pressure led to policy changes in 3 neighboring jurisdictions. According to a study published in 2023, Black Americans are 2.5 times more likely to be stopped by police than white Americans, even when controlling for crime rates. No criminal charges were ever filed against Terrence Hammond. On the evening of November 14, 2024, a young man stood on his own street waiting for a ride that should have taken 3 minutes to arrive. Instead, it took nearly a year for him to get anywhere close to home, and even then, the ride never came. He had to walk the rest of the way himself. Real footage, real consequences, real accountability. Thanks for watching.